The man's name is Glenn Kimball. That's Kimball. He's authored 2 books, Hidden Stories of the Childhood of Jesus and Hidden Politics of the Crucifixion. And I think he has a Ph.D. Glenn, welcome to the program.
It's great to be with you, Art. How are you?
Just fine. Indeed, do you have a Ph.D.?
Yes, from Southern Illinois University. The great fighting Salukis.
And then you're Dr. Kimball.
Glenn's great.
Yeah, I know, but you're Dr. Kimball. Anybody who went through getting a Ph.D. deserves being called what they are, Doctor. So, Doctor, you've been working for 25 years on this subject?
Yes, in fact, it's a little bit longer than that, actually. If you include my late teens and my early 20s, but 25 years specifically on the subject, yes.
Okay. It's going to be an interesting program, and I would like to say a couple of words before we get started. Somebody sent me a fax, Glenn, and I've received many faxes like this, but I knew the program with you was coming up. And the fax said, Art, it virtually demanded that I come on the air and categorically state whether or not I believe in God, the God in heaven, the God of the Bible. Do I believe Jesus Christ was real on earth and the Son of the God of the Bible? Do I believe in the Holy Trinity? Do I, and on and on and on. Do I categorically, yes or no, it demanded, believe in these things? And, you know, I've received, that kind of thing from people before, but somehow with this program coming and what I was thinking, it hit me right between the eyes, and I thought, if they slammed me up against the wall, Doctor, and they made me answer that question, I would have to say, no, I don't. I don't absolutely know it to be true, and this will surprise a lot of my audience. There are things that fly in our skies, Doctor, that are UFOs. Now, do I know? I know that part for sure because I've seen one. But do I know they contain little green guys, gray guys, or whatever, or military guys and they're our own craft? Could I state categorically that we're being visited from elsewhere? No, and I wouldn't. So I'm even skeptical about that. Frankly, I'm skeptical about anything that I can't wrap my hand around. And maybe before the night is over, you could help me wrap my hand around this. We'll see.
Well, I share your opinion entirely, and
you do?
I can categorically state that there are some things that I can say for positive, and one of the things that I can say for absolutely certain is that there is an abundance of ancient manuscripts which speak about Jesus, his apostles, their disciples, the travels of Jesus. I am tracking right now over 5 million manuscripts that deal with this topic, and I can say with absolute certainty that they exist. Now, what people do with that information is I send them back to their clergy and hope that their clergy can answer their doctrinal questions. I am a historian, and I will attempt to answer their historical questions.
Well, I've got in front of me, this has been revealed, we broke it on my show in the last few days, something called the Majestic Documents. And there are there's like 200 documents in here saying that extraterrestrials landed on Earth in 1947. It describes the craft and the beings that died, and it describes everything. So I've got this manuscript in my hand. But does that mean I believe that it happened? I could categorically say that something crashed in Roswell in 1945? No, sir. No, sir. Did you see the movie Contact?
I did indeed.
You remember when Jodie Foster was sitting there, and they trump carded her at the end, and they simply said, "Do you believe in the God of heaven?" As they were trying to decide who would represent the human race to whoever was out there, and she just gulped a couple of times and basically had to say no.
Well, you notice at the end of the movie she made an interesting comment. that she was approached once again and asked if her experience during that particular moment of time when the vehicle dropped through the waving machinery, whatever it was. And she said, yes, I can justify absolutely that was certain that I had this 30-minute experience.
Right.
And I can tell the people in the world that I have lived in South America, I've lived in Mexico, I've lived in Europe, and I can tell them with abundant security and assurance that there are ancient manuscripts which speak about Jesus around the world that have been hidden from our view. And I have copies of them. I'm tracking them. I've read the majority of them. There's no way in the world a person in their lifetime can read 5 million manuscripts. And that is the challenge for the rest of my life, is to read as many of them as I can. However, they have a harmonic theme. They speak of common things, and that's what we want to talk about tonight, is that there are some things that have been kept hidden from us for centuries, that have been hidden in plain sight. For everybody that is listening to my voice, they've been hidden in plain sight, and many of them that can be found in your local library if you know where to look for them.
There was, would you categorically state there was a man named Jesus who walked upon the earth?
Well, you're talking, I'm going to answer two ways. Number one, my personal belief, yes. Okay. Now I'm going to speak as a historian. There is such an abundance of manuscripts that phenomenologically and rhetorically speaking, that there is an extremely high probability that not only existed, but that he did many things that we are still unaware of.
Mm-hmm. Your book invites the first question, the obvious question: hidden stories of the childhood of Jesus. Hidden stories?
Well, I use the word hidden because 3 times in Jesus' life, he said that in the end, before I come again, that which was hidden will ultimately be made manifest. And I use the word hidden because of the reference of Jesus 3 times in his life.
Are you the one that is in the process of revealing that which has been hidden? In other words, are you, Doctor, going to be in part perhaps responsible for the return?
Geez, Art, that's never been asked of me. I don't envision myself as being clergy.
Well, on the other hand, you just said that these hidden things would be revealed prior to the return, and that is what you're revealing here, right?
Well, without doubt, I'd hope I'd play a small part, but I must also assure people that there is nothing that we will talk about tonight that is an original comment of mine at all. Historians have said said everything I'm about to say privately, and not only a few, but thousands of historians have said these things behind closed doors. I had a gentleman call me tonight, for example, who had run a radio station out of the Vatican some years ago, and he knew the Borgos Espiritu number 5 as I did, and I'm amazed, Charles. You're out there listening, I'm sure, but he found the same thing I did, that people speak outside of the public about things that they don't speak in public about for various and sundry political reasons, religious reasons, and out of sheer fear of criticism.
I'm sure that's precisely correct. Let's get into the meat of this a little bit. Let's talk a little bit about what most people don't know about the childhood of Jesus Christ.
Very good.
I mean, we've got, everybody I think has sort of the, I don't know, the general cooked normal version of what we got in Sunday school of the birth of Christ. Back now to Dr. Glenn Kimball. And so, Doctor, let's do it. What is it that we don't know about the childhood, the birth and the childhood of Jesus Christ?
Well, to be candid with you, we can get fragmented on every sentence I'm about to say and go off in a different direction, and we're going to try and focus just on the birth of Jesus alone for a moment.
Sure.
Jesus had older brothers and sisters. He had 2 older brothers and 2 older sisters, and for the first time in history, though I've been sending information to the learning channels of the television for years, they've come out and admitted on the documentary on the Lifetime station The great Catholic historians and Episcopal historians admitted for the first time that Joseph, that Mary, the Virgin Mary, was not in fact Joseph's first wife. He had been married and been a widower by the time he married the Virgin Mary.
What?
That is correct. Jesus, I'm not the first to say it. I'm not the 10,000th person to say it. But in fact, Joseph had been married and been a widower by the time of the birth of Jesus, and that he had 2 older brothers and 2 older sisters. So in order to set the scene for the birth of Jesus, we have to understand that when Joseph and Mary were headed for Bethlehem, that they were en route with James, Jesus' older stepbrother, in tow with them in this journey.
You're the first person I've ever heard say this.
I understand how shocking that might be. I understand how shocking every single sentence I might say might be.
Gee whiz, I thought I was going to shock you, and I opened up with, sorry, I can't definitively say I believe any of this. And, if I were sitting in Jodie Foster's chair, I wouldn't have been going on the ride, believe me, because I'd have had to, had I been honest, I'd have said no. And you've outdone me already, and we've just begun.
Well, hang on to your seat. We're in for a night full of surprises.
Okay.
We must understand that there's a distance from Nazareth, or there was no such city as Nazareth at the time of Jesus' birth, but the precursor of Nazareth, the distance between Nazareth and Bethlehem is about 84 miles.
Mm-hmm.
And we must understand they also didn't have Cadillacs or carriages, and so the finest mode of transportation at that particular moment in time was, in fact, the finest donkey you could buy, money could buy, and Joseph and Mary were heirs to the throne of David and were very wealthy, which is another common misconception. The word carpenter translated in the Bible comes from the Greek word tek, or in other words, it filters down through our word architect. Joseph was, in fact, an architect, a contractor, and a surveyor, and a very, very, very wealthy man himself. And so Joseph and Mary had the finest donkey in the country and were traveling to Bethlehem while Mary was ready to deliver the baby Jesus.
Then one might be curious to inquire how they got through the eye of the needle.
Into Jerusalem?
No. No, you mentioned they were very wealthy, I think, for the time.
That's correct.
No.
The Eye of the Needle was a portal into the city of Jerusalem. If you're referring to the rich people getting into the kingdom of heaven,
I am indeed, yes.
As a camel through the eye of the needle.
Yes, sir.
We must understand that the philanthropy of Jesus' family was renowned in those days, and there are many ancient texts which talk about the fact that they gave a third of their income every year to the poor and the needy, and were in fact popular in their community amongst the poor because they gave so much of their money to the poor and the needy. It was a family tradition. These people were the heirs to the throne of David, which was, by the way, not in power at the time of the birth of Jesus. How it was in power in the 6th century BC, and Jesus' grandmother, who wasn't, boy, I'm going to get you fragmented really badly here with this one. Jesus' grandmother was born in England and reverse immigrated before the birth of the Virgin Mary back to Palestine to marry a man named Joachim. So Jesus' grandfather, Joachim, was also very wealthy. And that tradition of philanthropy from the wealth of the family of Jesus extended for centuries. And we could talk about that ad infinitum. We can talk about financial records that survive to our day. And we can talk about the wealth of the family and what happened to it, and the fighting and infighting before and after the death of Jesus over that particular subject for forever. Except we want to focus back on the birth of Jesus for a moment, if we can, and suggest to the audience that Jesus's two of his older brothers were already out of the house and on their own. His one of his older brothers, I should say, and 2 of his older sisters had already left the house and had their own families, but they did have James, the older brother of Jesus, who eventually became the Apostle James, with them en route to Bethlehem the night of the birth of Jesus. And we get this story, by the way, from records written by James himself. Jesus' 2 brothers, James and Thomas, were assigned by Jesus to record the family histories, and these histories have been with us since the 1st century A.D., and in fact are included in a volume called The Only Rule of Our Faith, which was the Bible before the Bible. and was a popular document which was eventually excluded from the canon in the 3rd century A.D. for political reasons, and we could talk all night about that as well. But the actual birth events of the story of Jesus are more authentic, in my opinion, coming from family members than they are from historians or people who were not there. And so the quotes about what happened the night of the birth of Savior come from the writings of James himself. And so he wrote about what happened that night and was old enough to be aware of what was happening the night of the birth of his younger brother Jesus.
A great deal of what you're saying, people would say, conflicts very directly with what is in the Bible.
Actually, it doesn't conflict at all if you allow the Bible, the free agency, to be not a history book, but rather a collection of doctrinal statements and the ministry of Jesus. But if we want to get down to the who are the players and what is the actual history, then I don't think it conflicts at all with that. Certainly James was an authentic character who played a great role in the Bible. The fact that Jesus came from a very wealthy family, or at least came from the throne of David, is well known in the Bible. We forget that when the Magi came to the birth of, to visit the baby Jesus a month or so after his birth, that they brought with them a king's ransom of gold, frankincense, and myrrh, and I emphasize the word gold. This was a king's ransom, and yet we still perpetuate the myth that the family of Jesus was poor.
No question about it.
And yet that gift of gold, frankincense, and myrrh would have kept 100 families wealthy at that time. Certainly, this myth that Jesus was a poor carpenter's son is conflicted in the Bible itself, and is in fact a myth. The family of Jesus came from royal blood. They had preserved their family fortunes, and in fact had augmented that family fortune, and at the time of Jesus were very, very wealthy. And that story continues. We could go through the night and talk about the wealth of Jesus and the financial information about that for some.
Well, we have only just begun, and you have totally blown me away. The family of Jesus was rich.
Without any doubt.
Without any doubt. Doctor, I really have to ask you how you know this. In other words, what specific documents can you refer to that back up this contention?
Well, we actually have some financial correspondence from Jesus himself that have survived into our day, where we must understand at the end of my book, which the first book, which is the hidden stories of the childhood of Jesus, Jesus speaks of his own father's death, and we're referring specifically to Joseph, who was married to the Virgin Mary. That occurred when Jesus was about 14 or 15 years old. He writes about it in his own hand, and that document is in the back, translated, is in the back of my book, at the very end of the book, and I end the book there with the death of his with the death of his father. But under Jewish law, a single woman with a family, the next of kin, must, under the law, take over the protectorship of the family. Now you say, who was that person who took over the protectorship of the family from the time Jesus was 15 years old? And I'm telling you that there is an extreme abundance of information that man was in fact a man named Joseph of Arimathea, who was the third wealthiest man on the planet at that moment in history. And so the reason why we do not hear more about Jesus' youth or his young manhood was the fact that he was taken under the protectorship of Joseph of Arimathea, who had the great tin and lead mines in England. He was named Nobilis Decurio by Tiberius Caesar himself, and so Tiberius Caesar and Joseph of Arimathea knew each other intimately well. Cicero said it was harder to be a Roman senator than to be Nobilis Decurio, and Nobilis Decurio was the title that Caesar himself had given to Jesus' acting father from the age of 15 until his final ministry. And so Jesus had access to the wealth untold by the world. And he sailed on the boats of his great uncle and perpetuated much of the merchant traffic of his great uncle, and we have financial records that survive to this day to that effect.
Are
we going to get back to the birth of Jesus?
Oh, boy. All right. Fine. Back to the birth of Jesus. I just You were on the program while I wasn't here. I assume that you went over roughly the material I'm hearing now, or did you not?
I did a cursory survey of that material as well, and that's why the program was so popular.
What kind of reaction? Popular, yes. Many heard it, many reacted. How did you if you broke down the response that you got to the program, which I assume was big because, of course, this program has a very large audience, what was the reaction like?
Well, I expected to be tarred and feathered, to be very honest with you, as I've really been doing this research for myself and for my own private information. I never intended to write a book. If I had intended to write a book, I would have written it 20 years ago. However, I've been compelled by my lectures that I've given around the country on this particular topic. And so, yeah, we introduced the topic very slowly. This is a humongous topic, Art. There is so much to talk about that it would take us many, many, many days to talk about it. I could speak without drinking water for 6 days and not get to the end of the topic. But the fact of the matter is that we have risen Jesus to the level of myth. And unfortunately, the scholars of the world have referred to Jesus as a myth because of the records that exist do not correspond with our common colloquial traditions in the streets. And I'm trying to say that the common colloquial traditions in the streets probably are myth, but that the history about Jesus, which vindicates that he was who he said he was, is not a myth. And I think it's a wonderful, delightful Christmas story to talk about the fact that Jesus came from a wealthy family. He did not wear the robes, the priestly royal robes of the house of David with the many colors in them. He wore the simple home-woven robes that were a political statement of his alliance with the Essenes and the Gnostics, from which we derive the great Dead Sea Scrolls and the Nag Hammadi discoveries, which have been so popular in the newsprint. He made a political statement with the way he dressed that was not reflective of the actual financial status of Jesus. Mm-hmm. If you refer in the Bible, you notice that Peter came to him one time and referred to the fact that Jesus was paying a tax called the stranger tax. Now, those who are historians know that the stranger tax was much like an import-export tax, which was levied against those who were doing foreign commerce. And that's referred directly in the Bible itself, that, in fact, Jesus was being sought after to pay taxes. First of all, if he had been a poor person, he would have never been involved in the stranger tax at all. And certainly the evidence that he was paying the stranger tax is evidence of the great wealth of his family and the foreign commerce that was happening between himself and his great-uncle Joseph of Arimathea, and, in fact, the entire Roman Empire, and, in fact, the entire world itself.
Was Jesus Christ the Son of God, Big G?
If you're asking my personal opinion, yes. I'm going to give you a short answer, and then I'll give you a historical answer. Phenomenologically speaking and rhetorically speaking, if we look at the documents in a macrocosmic perspective, I would suggest to you that the macroscopic view also vindicates that Jesus was, in fact, of unnatural, extraordinary origin, and that he, in fact, was, in fact, the Son of God, Big G.
I would like to examine macroscopically with you some of the things that would back that up. Would you be interested in pursuing that?
Absolutely delighted with you, Art. No problem.
I really think, because at the beginning of the program you heard me say it, if somebody were to break my arm and say, an answer yes or no, can you absolutely say you embrace and understand and perfectly believe to be Jesus Christ, the Son of God with a big G? I'd have to say no. And I would love, Doctor, to have information so solid, so incontrovertible, that I would have to answer yes. Nothing would comfort me more. And frankly, I envy those people out there, and they are legion, who can answer in the immediate affirmative. So when we get back, let's do that. Let's take a look at why you believe what you believe. So my guest is Dr. Glenn Kimball. Here he is once again, and as promised, as we left the last hour, let us begin a macro examination of what facts exist. Facts facts is, that's a very interesting word. Not mythology, but facts exist proving that Jesus Christ was in fact the Son of God, big G, God. Doctor?
Yes, the journey from the uphill journey from a position of I don't know, which is technically speaking an agnostic position,
Yes, sir.
to a faith, to a firm, convincing faith in the God, big G, is a journey of many thousand steps. And though my extended family are all listening here, they can all tell you that I've been through that path in my life where I didn't believe in God, and where I thought that this was all mythology, and that the teachings of my childhood were in fact were myths and stories of my parents. And I have done a complete double take over a many-step path that has taken many, many years in my life. So I don't want to try and suggest that in a few minutes we can take that journey together, macrocosmically speaking. However, let's begin with the macrocosmic nature of the birth of Jesus, which might discuss a macrocosmic perspective in and of itself.
Take me down as far down the yellow brick road as you can.
Very good. At the night of the birth, first of all, the brothers of Jesus wrote more books, were more prolific in their authorship than all the rest of the apostles combined. That they are not reflected in the canon of the Bible for political reasons we'll discuss a little bit later on. But the brothers of Jesus play prominently in the scenario of the birth of Jesus as well. As we journey to the path along the path from Nazareth or pre-Nazareth to Bethlehem, Mary was riding the finest donkey that money could buy, and she went into labor. This was an 84-mile journey, and 3 miles outside of Bethlehem, or what was the very tiny hamlet of Bethlehem at that moment, which now is incorporated inside the city confines of Bethlehem. She went into labor. She told Joseph that, hey, look, the time has come, and he took her off the donkey, put her securely in the cave where you have visited, where he was actually born. Left James, Jesus' older brother, there, and said, watch over her while I run to the city and get a midwife to help us with the delivery. We must remember that the state of art of medicine in those days, many women died during childbirth, and so he was very concerned that he get the finest care possible.
Of course.
Most of the common people didn't have the luxury or could afford a midwife. However, Joseph could afford anything he wanted in those days. He made this quick journey as quickly as he could, went to Bethlehem, and in fact found a midwife that was willing to return with him and deliver the baby Jesus. This woman had a withered hand, but she came well recommended by the individuals that he spoke to. They both returned back to the site of the birth of the Virgin Mary, the birth of Jesus with the Virgin Mary, and she in fact delivered the baby Jesus. And the story of that birth, which ultimately cured the withered hand of Salome, who was the midwife, is in my book, The Hidden Stories of the Childhood of Jesus, and on my website, ancientmanuscripts.com. You can find references to it there as well.
We are linked to all of that, by the way, folks.
Yes, you are linked. You can go right to Art Bell and find me very quickly there. But it was a wonderful story, and this Salome plays an critical role in history, and yet she is only mentioned in the background at the crucifixion site and throughout Jesus' life. The Salome actually became a servant for the family, the Holy Family, Joseph and Mary, and she followed them all the rest of their lives. As a matter of fact, after Joseph's death, and even after the crucifixion, when Mary had to get out of town in the Exodus of the Faithful in 36 A.D., when she was expelled from Palestine with Joseph of Arimathea, the Bethany sisters, Martha, Mary Magdalene, Lazarus, and a number of people on a boat with no sails, no oars. That's a long story. We'll get back to it. But the midwife followed the Virgin Mary back to the homeland of her own mother, which was England, and she lived and died and spent the rest of her life there in England. So the story of the midwife is one of the most wonderful Christmas tales anyone could ever want. How anyone could think that that conflicts with anyone's tradition is beyond me, because it is a wonderful Christmas tale that should be told around every Christmas season, and yet is absent completely from our biblical record.
Why?
The reasons why it is absent are many and varied, but let me try and give you a couple of concrete reasons. Number one, the writings of the brothers of Jesus were politically difficult to accept from after the crucifixion of Jesus, because everybody wanted to follow the words of their own favorite apostle, who were in ministries sailing around the Mediterranean into India and going farther east than people can even imagine. And in other words, Peter and Paul did their ministries predominantly in Rome. And so the Romans basically, the Roman orientation picks up on Peter being the rock and Paul being a significant character in the Bible. If you go into France, Charlemagne preserved in the 7th century A.D. The canonical writings and the ancient manuscript writings of Joseph of Arimathea and Mary Magdalene. In fact, they derived their authority and their power and their connection with Jesus through Joseph of Arimathea and Mary Magdalene. And so Joseph of Arimathea becomes a saint in that tradition, and Mary Magdalene becomes the patron saint of France. We look at Thomas going after the crucifixion into India. We look at John the Apostle, who was always the maverick and also the best friend of Jesus, performing his post-crucifixion ministry on his way east all the way into the Orient, where we see dozens and dozens of little churches of John pop up along all the way across Asia, where he left the ancient records of the writings of the holy 24 prophets of the Old Testament and of the family of Jesus, etc., all the way across Asia. And we can get into that story at some other time. But getting back to the birth of Jesus, we must remember that the Star of Bethlehem is critical here, and this is where we get into a macrocosmic perspective for the first time.
Okay.
The Star of Bethlehem has been well known. We are the only generation, perhaps in history, that didn't know what the Star of Bethlehem is or are confused over it. Kepler knew it in the 1600s. In 1603, he saw the Star of Bethlehem occur again, and let me remind the people what the Star of Bethlehem really was. The Star of Bethlehem was the merger of Jupiter and Saturn in the constellation of Pisces. That occurred 4 times in the year of the birth of the Jesus. And the astronomers around the world knew of that the King of Israel, this great Messiah figure, was to be born, and where he was going to be born, he was going to be born in the city of Bethlehem. The astronomy community at that moment in time was very well connected with each other. They were all predisposed that the time had come for this birth of this great king, and they were all on alert for the Star of Bethlehem to occur. And when it occurred 4